And actually, when you're running a business, and particularly at this moment in time, it does have an impact. It will have an impact, I guess, on our mental health, our emotional health, and on our well-being as well. And it is a very important topic. And we're going to hear a bit more about that now with Professor Kevin Daniels, who is from the UEA, and he's going to be talking about well-being and how it can affect productivity.
Hello, am I live? Okay, excellent. So so hopefully the broadband connection will be hold up over the next 25 minutes or so. So I'm in to talk for about 20-25 minutes, and hopefully there might be a bit of questions. Hopefully my slides will come up soon. I don't know whether I have to connect the clicker to get onto the slides. But just while I'm waiting for that to happen, it was interesting that introduction mentioning Peter Drucker, because Peter Drucker is one of the most influential writers on management, and one of my favourite quotes from him is simply "management is people." So quote's a bit more extensive than that, and I can't remember all of it, but that bit always sticks with me. So as I mentioned, over the next 20-25 minutes, I'll be talking about the management of well-being in the workplace. I'm not going to actually spend too much time on the productivity benefits because they're so well established. I'm going to be talking more about the sort of management process itself. And again, the introduction was very interesting in that there is no one way or right way in regards to business plans, and there's no one way or right way in regard to how you should go about managing a sort of program of activities around workplace well-being. It really depends on the kind of business you are, or we can do from the research that we do, which I'll be speaking about, is give you some principles hopefully will inform your practice. So as we move through this, you can see some logos there. I have to always start these kind of presentations with acknowledgements, especially to the Economic and Social Research Council that fund the research we've been doing at UEA since, just on this screen, since 2015. I've been active in this area myself for about 30 years. But there's a team of us funded through various projects, and there's quite a few of us you can see there. So there's a cluster of expertise just in the business school at UEA, never mind in health sciences and the medical school as well, where there's a large number of people with interests in occupational health. So there's a great resource on your doorstep, locally, of course. And currently we're working with something called the Propel Hub, which stands for Productivity Outputs, People, Engagement and Learning. But I'll be drawing on other research that we've been doing since 2015 in this presentation. Just to give you a few pointers towards the Propel Hub, this is all free information out there. It's readily accessible. It's designed to get research into practice as quickly as possible. We are a consortium of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, CIPD, and 7 other universities around the United Kingdom, looking at different aspects of people management practices and links to productivity. We've only been going for the Propel Hub itself for about 6 months or so. The first events in June, and our current research related to the Propel Hub is just coming up to a year where we've been going. So in research terms, it's early stages, but there's still plenty of material up there to look at. Importantly, we're not trying to sell you anything. This is all free to access, and we are funded to make this stuff available, the material and resources available to people in what we hope is very practice and user-friendly format. So before we go on, there's a slide that I use a lot in these presentations, why organisations should think about workplace well-being. And there are 4 essential arguments that we use. There is the kind of legal case. Some of you will be familiar with the Health and Safety Executive and their mission on risk prevention. In law, there's no difference between risk to physical harm and risk to psychological harm. Recent changes as well in equality, diversity and inclusion law to make mental health a protected characteristic have also made, in a lot of cases, workplace well-being, especially psychological aspects, a lot more salient for organisations. as well. So we tend to find organisations take it seriously because there is a kind of legal imperative or a legal background to it. We tend to find in the work that we do with organisations that the organisations are a lot more progressive and advanced in how they go about managing workplace wellbeing, link either formally or informally to corporate social responsibility initiatives as well. So it's something that the organisation values in its own right. And of course, there is the business case. I'm not going to go into the research in too much detail, but there are thousands of studies conducted with hundreds of organisations and tens of thousands of people and whatever, and laboratory experiments as well, all showing there is a link between worker well-being and enhanced productivity, and whether this occurs through the people with higher well-being are more pro-social and therefore more likely to help colleagues and go the extra mile, or whether it's because workers with high well-being tend to be a lot more creative and therefore more innovative. There are multiple routes to how this happens, but I've got one statistic up there. So our colleagues at Rand Europe, who are based in Cambridge, on the basis of the data they have collected, they estimate something like a 13% productivity loss due to risk to mental ill health in the workplace, and that's through absenteeism and presenteeism, which is turning up to work when you possibly shouldn't be doing so because you're not feeling too well. Another case that we also address, because if there is a link, and there is a link to productivity, then organisations may not be as profitable as they could be. So you've got losses in corporation tax. If people aren't in work because they're ill, then you've got, especially on long-term disability, there's a loss of income tax. And there's also increased NHS spend on mental health. So this actually puts a strain on all of us. So there is a social value case, if you like, is that the government should actually want us to take workplace wellbeing seriously because it benefits the economy as a whole, as well as individual businesses. So again, links to the corporate social responsibility case as well. So what I'm going to talk about in sort of the next 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, is how organisations make their management of workplace wellbeing work in normal circumstances, program activities, so research relations over the past few years. But recently, and we have been in a position where we have been working with organisations, collecting data from them over the past few months as organisations moved into lockdown, where we were actually in situ, if you like, talking to organisations when that transition happened, and we have data from before and after lockdown from a small number of organisations, about 5 organisations. So we can look in detail at what those organisations did. So we're going to look at some of the specific problems of remote working and how organisations adapted to the current extraordinary circumstances as well. And some of the lessons from normal circumstances also apply in the current situation too. So in terms of what works, this is the quote at the top we got it is one I use quite a lot in these sorts of presentations. This is from someone we interviewed a few years ago. Unfortunately, there isn't one single magic bullet. We find that organisations that are more advanced in how they look at workplace wellbeing tend to do some or all of these activities that we have in these 5 areas we've mentioned here. So I'll be moving from left to right in a clockwise direction. The first thing there on the sort of top left, if you like, is a high quality job. We tend to think of these jobs as being relatively well paid, but certainly with high levels of job security, people to use skills, the chance for people to develop their skills if they're starting from a low base, a chance to have some input into decisions. I mean, typically people will tend to think of these jobs as sort of, healthcare practitioners, advanced manufacturing, but it doesn't have to be the case. You can implement these things in retail stores and in small businesses simply by talking to people in the organisation and asking them their opinions of how they would improve things or how they would do things better. And involve them in the business that way. It is relatively simple to do and can be done very, very informally. And one way of doing that actually is to train your managers in kind of essential people management skills around delegation, communication, coaching, and clarification. So tend to find a lot of organisations do invest in the management of people and their line managers. And this would seem to be quite a cost-effective way of approaching wellbeing, because one manager can have a very profound influence on multiple people. And it is often said the most important relationship you have at work is with your line manager. And we do know line management behaviours do have a very strong influence on worker wellbeing. So that is a good place to invest, and probably the first place I would invest. I know I work for a management education institution, but there are other providers available as well. And I'll give a shout out to the East of England Co-op, who have actually in their management development program actually included module out the modules that they have for store managers. In fact, I think for every manager in the organisation is around sort of workplace wellbeing as well. So it can be incorporated relatively straightforwardly into box standard management development. Social relationships at work, so over to the right-hand side, they're really important as well. And again, can be enhanced in very, very cost-effective and simple ways. It is important to have an ongoing activities here, but we don't mean social events. We just mean people connecting. There could be in problem-solving workshops, regular team meetings. The important thing is to get people communicating regularly and as much as possible about things that they have in common. And of course, one of the things they have in common is they all work in the same place for the same organisation. So that can be facilitated too. And again, relatively cost effective. It's simple. You don't need any specialist expertise. All you need to do is be able to get people in the same room and talking about common interests. As I say, problem solving workshops, social activities can be included as well. And these things are done remotely these days, of course, and can be facilitated relatively easily with the right IT. Those three things at the top, job management, social relationships, are the things I would prioritise because they are for everybody and you can reach a lot of people. The things at the bottom, the health and wellbeing programme, a lot of organisations do this, and it's about health promotion, healthy eating, and do more exercise. Of course, that's great for people as well. Not every organisation has access to the kind of expertise to be able to provide that, but there is quite a lot of free stuff out there, including provided by Norfolk County Council. It's just a question of finding it and signposting people towards it. But again, think about social relationships. It's quite easy to hook people up to do things together, which admittedly at the moment is quite challenging, but some organisations have walking groups where they might walk around Norwich city centre, or for those on the coast, go for a walk on the seafront or something like that. And you get a bit of healthy exercise, you get the social relationships as well. And the other thing we have there is around help for struggling workers. And these are people struggling with everyday life stresses perhaps, or have a health condition. So typically we think here of the employee assistance programme, that kind of thing, but flexible working falls into it. So flexible working hours so that people can go and see their healthcare provider if they need to, or be able to pick up the kids from school if they need to, and that kind of thing. And that very much links with some power people have over their jobs as well. In terms of how to do it, how to implement a series of activities, because again, as I mentioned, the leading kind of organisations here do multiple things, not necessarily in all of those 5 areas, but will cover a fair segment of those 5 areas, and sometimes we'll be doing things they don't even realise that they're doing things around some work processes that have a wellbeing effect, but aren't specifically designed for wellbeing itself, else to create work, more innovation, improve productivity, those kind of things. But what we tend to find organisations, again, do when they're implementing these activities, if they're going to be successful, they have a number of changes. On the left-hand side, as you look at it, there'll be the circle, and the changes will be made in 3 areas. There'll be people who are implementing the changes. So you need to give people the latitude to implement whatever activities you decide should go into your suite of activities and make tangible changes in the workplace. The very act of making those changes will enhance your capability to make changes in the future and make future improvements. Those changes will affect the workplace culture, how we do things around here. So when organisations first start, they can often find a conflict between the practices that they have and the practices that they think they would be. A great example here is in healthcare organisations, where you have people who work very, very long hours and say, well, patient care would be compromised if I don't work the hours that I work. So those kind of arguments and conflicts need to be settled, but becomes less of an issue the more that you engage with workplace wellbeing practices. So you tend to see that the organisations change their culture, and the way things are done tend to become more convergent with wellbeing. And wellbeing, as I've mentioned, necessarily mean being anti-productivity either. Sort of long-run sustainability and productivity is linked to workplace wellbeing. So the two are actually compatible and can be made compatible in spite of where you might be starting from. But what we find that organisations do in order to make those changes, to change the workplace culture, is they set up a number of mechanisms, and the ones that we found in our research are signalling mechanisms. So these will be things like senior managers talking about their own wellbeing issues, possibly their own mental health issues, are certainly sending tangible signals in terms of their what they do as well as what they say. And it's often senior managers that are given this role, but not exclusively. Sort of different worker groups, especially if they're critical to the business success, might be a means of setting the right kind of example. There will usually be some sort of governance structure, a wellbeing working group or health and safety committee or something like that. It's important that is inclusive and representative, so in order to hear the voices of the different people affected. Otherwise, you might end up developing a set of activities that no one wants and doesn't actually address people's wellbeing concerns. So that's important. And within that is to have some sort of way of learning from your activities and what works and what needs to be adapted over time, because we do find that kind of learning and perseverance is one of the key features of actions that do succeed. And on the right-hand side of the slide, there's 5 principles there. Is that organisations will often do a lot. It's important to communicate how the different activities are interconnected to the workforce, otherwise it'll just look disjointed. So there has to be some strategy communicated. It doesn't have to be written down, it can be informal, but there does need to be some sort of coherence which is communicated as well. So there is, people realise that this is an integrated approach to wellbeing, and wellbeing is being taken seriously. Not everybody gets it right first time. Most people make mistakes at some point, so there has to be perseverance and learning, and organisations will do that and take the lead from the major construction firms here in their approach to safety, that they do learn from incidents and they do learn from near misses, and it's a similar sort of approach with workplace wellbeing as well, is what can you learn. So there's learning structures really important to capture how to adapt things. For the most part, it's recommended to do things that are already consistent with what you're doing. Make sure that it fits with organisational values, systems and processes. A really good example here is from a Swedish automotive manufacturer that used Kaizen techniques for continuous improvement. They just included in their Kaizen meetings and their continuous improvement process is not only we're going to make better parts for the cars, the manufacturers that we supply to, how we improve work processes to make work better for us. And so we used an existing system and just said, well, we can do something about wellbeing within that system as well. Sometimes though, you might have toxic or harmful practices around sort of excessive working hours or bullying management relationships, and those need to be challenged and confronted and new norms created. It seems to be that senior managers can be very important all the way through, but are critically important in challenging norms and practices that might be harmful, and to send the right signals about what needs to be done. So if we move to the current context now for the next few minutes, a lot of people have moved to remote working very quickly. Some analyses from survey data collected nationwide by our partners in Cardiff have indicated essentially that people quite like working at home and want to do so at least partially in the future, the vast majority of people. And people, in terms of the amount of work done, generally there's no overall effect in how productive people feel they are. Around 40% report they're as productive as they usually were. 30% saying a bit more productive, and 30% maybe a bit less productive. So overall, no aggregate effect. But for those people that have had sort of performance effects, then clearly that needs to be looked at. And some of these performance effects might come through some of the psychological effects of remote working that some people experience. The other thing very quickly to notice, so if you do move to agile working, there are a number of benefits which will be discussed in the media anyway, in terms of possibilities for better work-life balance, reduced commuting, and the impact on the environment, and also sort of less office space is required, so reduced rental costs perhaps. But there are some concerns. Not everybody, there's a wide amount of variability here, but some people can experience some kind of emotional concerns or emotional issues related to anxiety, depression, just being bored because of lack of social contact, which might have performance effects in terms of concentration or more drug or alcohol use. And most of the effects appear to come from social isolation and perhaps poor communication. So these are things that can be managed, and there's quite a large research literature on remote working. Just think of the British Antarctic Survey, for instance. They are very, very remote workers, and they have been very, very well researched over the years. And other jobs where people are remote. So we can learn from those kind of organisations and those kind of work practices. Information technology is only part the answer, just so you can't just throw IT at it. Of course, poor IT does have issues, but the IT is a vehicle for developing and delivering which addresses the social concerns. So one of the things that you have with agile workers and remote workers is that traditional supervision doesn't work. They have to be trusted a lot more to make the right kind of decisions. So that might include some kind of training and decision aids to people, for people to help them do the job, and including fixing their own IT problems as well. And the other thing which is important is to have that varied, we call it social and professional contact. So it's not just keeping going with sort of social events at work, so you virtually come in for a coffee morning or that kind of thing. It's also regular feedback sessions, as you would normally do in a normal office environment. You have a conversation with someone, just checking in how they're doing at work. Access to training and development, discussions about career progression. They're all still relevant to remote workers and people that may be in another town, another county, or even another country. It's just a question of then using the IT to facilitate those conversations. But in terms of how organisations manage the change, as I mentioned very early on in this presentation, we were lucky enough, and I've realised I'm going to have to speed up a little bit here, to actually be able to talk to organisations and collect data from organisations during the process, so we can learn some lessons about how organisations manage the process of lockdown and that went on. And essentially, we saw that over time, organisations progress their approach, or the organisations that adapted better progress their approach. They started from, some of the organisations started from a better place than others. So organisations that have already good existing relationships between management and workers, that helps a great deal. It's helped because it meant the messaging was more authentic. They had a better basis for saying, look, we're in it together. It's not a us versus them. It's a we situation. And also organisations that had some sort of practices around health and well-being already had an infrastructure. They already had people implementing health and well-being practices that they could draw on through the process. We also found that organisations that adapted better tended to be proactive. They didn't wait for government advice, they acted before government advice. And one of the examples here is a construction firm that shut down its operations in March. It told its clients it was doing so because they wanted to put in place better safety procedures for when the economy started opening up again, but also the workers were very concerned and they were listening to the workers about being on site. Even though the government was saying at the time, it's okay to be outside, construction work can carry on. They shut down very quickly, and we've got examples of organisations that moved to agile and remote working 2 weeks before the government knocked everything down. Another area of consistent and clear messaging to everybody, and here senior managers appear to be really important again, in terms of sending the messages, talking about their own well-being issues. And we were talking to some people that sort of like the CEO was turning up with ruffled hair and not necessarily in the pajamas, but certainly not in a business suit, for video conferences and sending those messages, and also messages about performance expectations, which was, at the moment, health and well-being is really serious, it's really salient. They are existential threats to us, and that's more important to make sure that yourself is safe rather than worry about productivity and performance, because organisations understood that in the longer term that performance would come back, but it was a case of getting through this particular crisis. So that clear, consistent messaging, again, was really important. It helped establish the credibility and authenticity of the organisational response, which was about sort of looking after staff during lockdown, during the transition. And then what we found was the actions evolved. Some of this was continuing on, sort of setting the correct performance expectations, especially for people with, childcare or other caring responsibilities, to say, well, actually, we accept that there are things you need to do for your family, so we will take that into account in the amount of work and the type of work we expect you to do. Organisations that were setting up social groups for people in similar situations. So one of the organisations we were talking to, we set up a support group for people with childcare responsibilities. I think it was specifically for single parents. So there was a support mechanism there. So it wasn't something the organisation was controlling, it was something that the organisation facilitated, which was done remotely. And so it's one of these things which it kind of indicates that people do look after their own well-being, but the organisation facilitates how that can be done. So those evolving responses were important in the whole process too. Now, I'm not sure whether the slide pack is going to be made available, but if it is, I've got some quotes that I can use to embellish the what I've just been describing there. But I will finish there and take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Kevin. I thought that was a really interesting presentation that you gave there, and I think some of the things that struck me as well is about the meaning of an organisation and why people change. I mean, from the research that you were talking about, how much do you think that the culture will be changed because of what's happened with the pandemic? Is it a game changer in that sense?
I think for some organisations, certainly one of the organisations that we were working with, and talking about culture, is a Japanese-owned organisation, for whom kind of working from home is not culturally. People turn up to the office. We look after the people in the office. We make a very, very comfortable place to work. There's brilliant facilities. That's but we go to a place of work because we are a community. In this particular location, a workplace community, and we will be together. It's a very strong organisational culture, and they have to go to agile working very quickly. And prior to that, people are saying, can we do a bit of working from home? We won't have to commute as much, and the organisations say no. We're a workplace community. It's very important that we all sort of pull together and get to know each other and that sort of thing. But they managed to move very quickly. I don't see them going back. I mean, they had to adapt very quickly. So I think for some organisations, the changes are going to be profound. As someone involved in higher education, I think that we will use a lot more online resources going forward. The technology's been there for years. It just hasn't been used. So we move to more kind of blended learning. So I think some organisations will actually embrace the technological challenges and take those forward with how they develop their services and those kind of things, and how they might cooperate with other organisations. For some organisations, in advanced manufacturing, for example, or you have a lot of kit in advanced manufacturing, so the changes are going to be more around sort of workplace safety. But in construction and advanced manufacturing, they tend to be pretty good at safety anyway, and to have very, very good and robust processes. So in those kind of organisations, it's kind of interesting. A lot of we do around mental health and well-being, they learn from what they know about safety and just move the principles across, because they're not actually a million miles apart. It's health and safety, it's the same sort of area. So I think it very, very much depends, but I think there'll be a lot of learning goes on.
And I think you hit the nail on the head as well, didn't you? I mean, you talked about higher education, but any student of organisational behaviour will read in their textbook that an organisation isn't about the buildings, bricks and mortar. It's the people, it's the culture within it. I just wonder if what we're seeing now is actually that in practice, because actually, what does it mean to be an organisation when people are working in, we're doing it today. We're communicating virtually, people are working from home. How do you have organisational sort of cohesion? What a lot of senior managers, CEOs are worried about, in an era when we're all dispersed.
It's, I kind of realise it's a challenge. I'd say three things, if I may, about that, if I can keep them all in my head. The first thing is that kind of identity and that cohesion. That really makes organisations resilient. So it's really important to establish. And we did some analysis of organisations in the 2008 crisis, and those that came through better in terms of performance and well-being were those that sort of had the stronger sense of identity. Workplace cultures in general, we find that organisations, whether willingly, deliberately, or just accidentally, when they start doing workplace well-being seriously, the delivery mechanism actually comes through a change in workplace culture. It's mindfulness course, or the resilience course, or the healthy eating. There's changes in workplace cultures. Sort of help build the momentum and sustain and change the way people interact. And the third thing is, although it's a challenge where we're all remote, it's not actually as difficult as some things, because a lot of time it's just getting people to do things together. Yeah. So that having that collective activity and that communication, it's very well established in social psychology that it's really easy to get people to have a sense of identity. I mean, some of the early experiments, there were, people were saying, well, you lot over there, you prefer cats to dogs, and you lot over there prefer dogs to cats. And they were, creating an identity in that kind of simple way. So where people do have communal activities and work is a communal activity, we work in organisations. Organisations exist because we cannot do everything ourselves. We have to collaborate. Then it's already there for being able to establish that kind of identity. And as I mentioned in terms of the organisations that we sort of data were those that already have a strong sense of communal bonds between workers and management and everybody else. So admittedly, it's always easier if you're in the right starting place, but it's not so difficult actually to get to that starting place.
Excellent, great. Kevin, thanks so much. I just want to mention Propel Hub, because you talked about that. That's a free resource. I think a lot of businesses would be interested in that.
So it's absolutely, it's publicly funded. I'm supposed to go back to that, the slide where I mentioned, the Treasury should want you to do it as part of the Treasury's commitment to kind of helping, workplaces more productive and healthier as well. So there's plenty of stuff out there, including quite a lot of resources at the moment on remote working as well.
Excellent. Great. Kevin, thanks very much for that. It was a really enjoyable presentation. Thanks a lot. Okay, that was Professor Kevin Daniels from the University of East Anglia. I certainly found that a very informative presentation, and it sticks to the theme, actually, which we've been talking about this afternoon at the Restart Festival, which is around people.